Hello and welcome to www.electricalpereview.com, the ultimate online resource for passing the electrical power PE exam. This is our second video in the series of how to pass the PE exam the very first time and how to pass if you have failed before. In the past video, we covered the first stage, planning. On this video, we'll be covering the study stage, which is going to be about 3 to 5 months leading up to the exam. So there's 4 major components of our stage 2 study strategy. The first is a time-based study strategy. The second is blocking out days on the calendar. The third is practice problems. And the fourth and final is which topics to study and in what order. So this video is going to be diving deep into all 4 of these. The first we're going to take time to talk about is our time-based study strategy. So what exactly does that mean? Well, first of all, eliminate distractions, right? Our study time is precious, so we must protect it. If you have trouble with your cell phone, first and foremost, leave your phone in another room or lock it in the car. If you find yourself constantly either checking the time, checking your social media, favorite websites, news, emails, text messages, whatever it is, if you find yourself constantly having to remind yourself to leave it in your pocket or face down, just get rid of it. Social media and cell phones are the biggest distractions we have on a day-to-day basis when we're trying to do anything productive, and you can't even begin to imagine how much time you waste switching tasks, going back and forth. So if you have a problem with this, as most of us do, including myself, just eliminate it. Get it out of sight. Next, same thing but for the computer. If you're on the computer and you're constantly checking other websites, constantly switching back and forth between reminding yourself you have to study and you have to get off Facebook, get off a news website, or get off your email, install parental controls on your computer. And I'm 100% serious. Search Google. There are plenty of free parental controls out there that will work wonders. Use a very long password. You can use a random password generator that you can also find on Google. Print it out, put it in an envelope, seal it, and stick it somewhere out of reach to where if you really want to take those controls off, it better be for a good reason. So eliminate those distractions. Those are going to be the 2 biggest ones. If you have trouble, just get them out of there. Make sure you can protect your study time. You're going to need every minute of it to focus. Next, if you have trouble studying on your own, you find yourself kind of dozing off. If you're in too quiet of an environment, you're too secluded and isolated from other people, chances are you may be susceptible to not working as hard because no one's looking over your shoulder. Now, not everyone is guilty of this 100%, but there's going to be times when just about everyone can do better with the social pressure of working in public. So this next strategy is get out of the house, go somewhere in public and be around people. You're much more likely to be accountable and less likely to slack off when you're in view of other people. It's kind of funny how that works, but it's very effective, so take advantage. Examples of this, Starbucks are great, local coffee shops, right? Plenty of caffeine. Public or college libraries are also great because people there are usually only there if they need to be and if they're there to study. Conference room at work is a fantastic example. If you're hanging out after work to study, don't be afraid of taking up that conference room because it's going to put you in view of other people and it's going to help you take advantage of that social pressure that we could leverage to make ourselves more productive. Next, so weekend study schedules. Our goal is a minimum of 2 4-hour blocks every Saturday and Sunday, plus a 1-hour break in between and at least 1 hour of review after. Your weekends, since I'm assuming most of you are going to be working professionals, are going to be your most profitable time to study. You must value them above all else and use them wisely. If you have trouble with people interrupting your study time or not being respectful, go back to video 1 on having people respect this time by explaining to them how important it is to get that buy-in. So our weekends are absolutely the most precious time we have because it's the longest time we have to study without work. And remember, it's always going to be better to over-prepare and pass than under-prepare or miss it by just a bit and have to go through all this again. And you're going to see that this is going to be a common theme in our study strategy. It's going to be, let's over-prepare. Let's put our money on knowing we're going to ace it, not fooling around, not taking it again. We want to study, prepare, take the exam, pass it, and move on. So let's look at an example weekend study schedule. 7 a.m. wake up, eat breakfast, about an hour. 8 a.m., boom, hit it hard. We've already got our phone in another room or in the car. We have parental controls on our computer if we have trouble staying on task. We're going to go after it up until noon, take a lunch break, kind of hang out for an hour. Next, second study session, 4 hours. Work hard until dinner and a break for about an hour. And then last around 7 p.m., maybe review work and organize your material. We've got 1 to 3 hours there, but you can use as much time as you need. So let's take a minute and realize that this is pretty much going to be your entire Saturday and your entire Sunday from now until you take the exam. It is a lot of time. It's a big commitment, so be ready for that going in. Our goal for weekdays now, minimum of 1 to 2 hours of review every evening after work. Fit in an hour daily during lunch at work if you can. You can always skip going out. You don't have to go out to eat. You're going to save a lot of money, and it's going to free up that window to just kind of have the one-on-one time with yourself and your review work. Next, if you're a morning person, you can always fit in an hour before work at home or get up early and go to the office ahead of time. And you can capitalize on that time when everyone else is sleeping and it's still quiet. Next is schedule a 1 to 2 4-hour evening sessions each week as needed to push through difficult topics. And again, stay late at the office or go to a coffee shop if you're distracted at home. Very important. Study schedule for the weekdays. Our example here is 8 a.m. Say we're off at work. Noon, we're eating at lunch at our desk and we're using that hour to ourselves to help prepare for the exam. Go to work, finish up for the rest of the day. 5 p.m. review, hang late after the office, or do it at home if you can, if it's quiet. 6 p.m. dinner with the spouse or kids. 7 p.m. evening study session as needed, 1 to 3 hours, but of course longer if needed. 10 p.m. bed. And of course, the other option to this is before work, you could get up extra earlier if you are a morning person. So stick to what works best for yourself, either working in the morning or working in the evening. Now, if this study schedule feels aggressive to you, it should, and it's because it is. You're going to have a tremendous amount of material to cover and a very real and quickly approaching deadline to be tested on it. Not passing, to remind you, has significant negative consequences, financial consequences, strained temporarily personal relationships, family, coworkers, friends, missed events. Passing, on the other hand, has a significant positive consequence. So let's think about some positive and motivating internal mottos to remember. First, from a successful student, I would much rather over-prepare and pass than risk not preparing, fail, and have to go through this again. That's going to be the mindset of a successful student. Another mindset of a successful student is this extra hour could be what it takes to tip the scales so that I have a passing score. Another example from a successful student, this extra hour could make the difference between a passing and failing score. So these are kind of some of the things that you're going to have to tell yourself as your motivation begins to go through dips. When you're relying on discipline to push through and get through, when your fingers hurt from writing so much on paper, when your mind's tired, when you're kind of stressed from either work or your social obligations and your family obligations. These are kind of the internal dialogues of a successful student because it all boils down to discipline. Next, I want to make myself, my spouse, my family, and my boss and colleagues proud and or envious. Also the mindset of a successful student. These are kind of the drives and internal motivations that are going to get the successful students through it that an unsuccessful student is not going to have, and they're not going to be able to rely on it. So use this to your advantage. Okay, next, we're going to talk about blocking out days on the calendar so we can focus. Use your work calendar, such as your Outlook mail calendar, Google Mail calendar, to block out weekday lunches, sitting at your desk, going over review material when it's quiet, and to block out weekday evening study sessions that you're planning to do at the office or before heading home. Use your personal calendar or planner that we spoke about from our first video in stage 1 to block out weekends and block out evening time at home. And we're actually talking, just to be clear, about physically writing down the time you plan on starting your study or review session. And why we do this? Because it's a psychological tactic that's going to help to hold ourselves accountable. Just like seeing your study session on your work calendar during the day means you're more likely to hold yourself to it since you're anticipating it all day in your mind or your mental calendar. So as people invite you to do things or as other ideas of how to spend your time popping in your mind, you're going to know that you have that chunk of time already blocked out on your calendar. You're already anticipating for it and you have it set aside to start and end at that time. Means we're much more likely to stick to it than rather not. It's just like kind of going to the gym. We all want to go to the gym and get in shape, but if we don't have it as a reminder, no, I can't do this, I'm going to the gym, or no, I can't do that, I have a study session, we're more likely to slack off when no one's looking. So actually writing them down on the calendar kind of helps build that mental pressure to hold ourselves accountable to sticking to it. So make sure you do that as well. Next, on your planner or calendar, first thing, mark the date of the exam. Next, you're going to want to mark T minus the number of the week leading up to it on each week, starting from the exam date, working backwards. So, for example, if the exam is on the 15th, on the 8th, prior to that is going to be, you're going to write down T minus 1 week. And the week prior to that, you're going to write down T minus 2 weeks. And we're going to do this all the way backwards until we reach the current date. The reason we're going to do this is it's really going to help conceptualize how much time you have remaining and give you a sense of urgency to help keep a healthy pressure on your motivation. It's very easy to think that we have all this abundant amount of time in the beginning, but if we don't capitalize it, we don't really study hard from the beginning, it's going to put us in a really tough spot to make sure that we can pass the exam. So really being able to conceptualize how much time we have is important, because it's going to kind of keep the leverage on us to keep the foot on the gas pedal and not take it slow. So avoid the trap of feeling like you have an abundance of time to study initially, because big hint, we all know it, we don't. We have just enough time to study, do what we need to do, and pass the exam. So let's think about an unsuccessful student's internal dialogue. I felt like I had plenty of time to study in front of me, so I really didn't take it seriously until several weeks leading up to the exam. By the time I really buckled down, it was clear that I severely underestimated how much time it takes to work through each topic, especially the ones I had trouble with. I think this is one of the contributing reasons I did not pass. Sound familiar? Okay, blackout days on the calendar continue. If you have trouble concentrating for extended periods of time, I want you to try experimenting with something called the Pomodoro Technique. It's attributed to Francesco Cirillo in the 1980s. And essentially, it's a 25-minute period of studying followed by a 5-minute break. That accounts for 1 Pomodoro. Every 4 Pomodoros, take a longer 20-minute break. Now, this might kind of seem silly, but you have to try this. 2 Pomodoros equal an hour, 8 Pomodoros equal about 4 hours and 30 minutes. Try it on especially difficult days, and you will be amazed. Please don't just follow this as, oh, that's kind of interesting, I might try it. Try it out. 25 minutes followed by a 5-minute break. It might seem counterintuitive and ineffective at first. That's what I thought going into it. I thought 25 minutes, that's hardly enough time to do 1 or 2 problems. But by the time you take that 5-minute break, you're going to be ready to jump right back into it. You'll find that you can work much longer periods of time throughout a long duration throughout the day without getting tired, without slacking off, and you're going to be able to keep that same pace. So really try this out. I wish I had personally discovered this sooner. I use it for just about everything. I'm telling you, if you're not sure, try it out for 1 day. I guarantee you will never go back. Okay, next we're moving on to practice problems. This is going to be the most important section of this video. We're going to cover our actual strategy on what problems we cover and how we cover them. So pay attention. This is the time to sit up and really give all of your focus to this, because this is really going to help your study efforts. First and foremost, your ability to pass the exam depends entirely on your ability to accurately solve problems in a timed manner. Keep that in mind. Really think about what that means. Everything that I'm going to tell you to do and everything that you're going to do to study, you're going to be focusing on improving your ability to accurately solve problems in a timed manner, because that's all it is. It's one big, long test. And of course, you want to learn the topics. That's also extremely important. But what's our number one goal here? We want to pass this exam. So what does that mean for us, and where do others go wrong? Well, this means avoid the trap of spending hours reading books and reading material before you attempt to solve problems. If you spend 4 hours reading a topic and you can't solve the first, second, or third problem that come up, I think you just wasted 4 hours of precious time that we could have dedicated to something else. So instead, what we're going to do, we're going to attack example problems first when you move on to new topics, and then review concepts and theory after. So it's kind of a backwards approach if you're not used to it, but it's much, much, much more effective to improve our ability to solve problems in a timely manner. And it's going to be okay to struggle a little bit in the beginning. Using your brain first will help you retain information when you do cover concepts and theory. So this is going to work because when you let yourself try first, you're going to engage your problem-solving skills compared to dozing off, getting lost in material, or kind of taking a while to get through it. The other cool thing that happens is there's going to be a lot of light bulb moments when new topics click. They're going to stay with you longer, and they're going to help you instantly understand previous problems that you struggled with. It's a really neat how this works. You're going to be working out one problem, and all of a sudden you're going to go, aha, this problem helps you understand that one problem I was working on a few days ago that I couldn't get. Now I can go back to that problem and solve it. And these little light bulb moments kind of help move you along and click you through, compared to trudging through hours and hours and hours of reading, reviewing concepts, understanding theory. It's just so time consuming. It is not effective. Avoid that trap at all costs. Please trust me on this. You should spend as much time as possible attacking problems. A good rule of thumb is about 80% practice problems to 20% of reviewing material. Reviewing material could be reading theory, reading book chapters, understanding concepts, or even reviewing the problems you've already worked on. So you want to focus on all your time attacking problems. So an example of this, figure about 6.5 hours of practice problems for about every 1.5 hours of reading material. So don't get caught in reading and not answering problems correctly. So first, let's check the take by an unsuccessful student. Their line of thought would be something like, well, I spent hours and hours reviewing the material and concepts beforehand because I thought it would make solving problems easier. By the time I got to solving any problems, it was obvious. I barely retained any of the key information to actually get a problem right. I had to spend time going back into the material anyways. It took entirely way too long to get past each topic, and I did not feel confident at all when it came time to take the exam. So this is exactly what we want to avoid. So let's compare it to what we want to go after instead. Here's the internal dialogue from a successful student. Aggressively attacking problems first, even if it was a new topic, really helped me build momentum. Sure, I had to stop and look up the right formula at times to get the right answer, but doing this really helped me remember. Spending time reviewing the concepts and theory after solving problems meant that most of it just intuitively made sense and felt like less learning and more like refreshing what I already knew and understood. Best of all, this greatly increased the speed at which I could answer problems correctly from the successful student. So this is exactly what we're going for. Next, if you get stuck on a problem, move on. You're going to aggressively attack problems. If you get stuck, move on. We're going to come back later and we're going to talk about that. So example, spending 1 hour chasing the correct method to solve a problem and still getting stumped, forget about it. Document this problem in the practice problem index. This will be in the first section of your study binder that you're going to build. Remember, time is our most precious resource to use towards attacking and solving problems correctly. So anytime something gets in the way of that, we're going to eliminate it. Just like if a cell phone is a distraction and it's getting in the way of using our precious time to solve problems correctly, we're going to eliminate that distraction. Even applied to if a difficult problem is making us chase our tail, spin our wheels, or flip through the book for an hour to try to figure it out, forget about it. Move on, right? Move on, conserve your precious time, and come back later. Those light bulb moments I talked about before, it's where they're going to come in handy. So you're going to write it down in your practice problem index. We're going to talk more about that in the next slide. And you're going to be building an actual study binder that you're going to use to study with and eventually take to the exam. So download our practice problems index. You can find that on the same course page, and you're going to keep it in the front of your study binder. So there's just a quick look of what that looks like, and it's just a real simple index. You're going to write down the problem number, where you can find it later when you're reviewing, which is important, right? We're not just going to forget about these problems that we can't solve. We're just going to choose to focus on them on a time that makes much more sense. So for example, if we were just starting out, say we got to example 3 on power factor and motors and we couldn't solve it, boom, write it down, move on. Say we're solving problems, we get to a quiz, and on the second question, we can't solve the question on battery run life, even though we're putting time to try to figure it out. We recognize that, we're going to move on, we're going to write it down. Same thing, say we're working on number 312 on a made-up power reference manual on 3-phase transformers. If that exists, I don't know, but that's just an example. You're going to write it down and move on. Remember, the goal of all of this is just to keep on moving, keep on chipping away at solving problems correctly. So another thing is, anytime you need to look up a formula you can't recall to solve a problem, write it down in your study binder so that you can reference it for future problems, right? Keep your study binder organized. It should grow as you prepare for the exam. It's going to help you solve future problems, and most importantly, you can take it with you to the exam. So as of this recording, you can still take in any material to the exam, books, reference material, printed out material, handwritten material, as long as it's in a 3-ring binder. So when I say a study binder, I actually mean you're going to go out and buy a physical 3-ring binder, and you're going to keep that problem index on the front. And leading up to that, every single formula that you can't just write down off the top of your head that you need to look up to solve a problem, you're going to write it down in that study binder. That way you can come back to it later, because if you can't remember it now, chances are the next time you have that problem, you might not be able to remember it either. Same for the exam. So next, this study binder is going to turn into a personalized reference book that you're already familiar with, and it's going to be gold. So this strategy is powerful because it prevents you from wasting time, and patterns begin to emerge when you start documenting these problems you're having trouble with. You're going to eventually end up creating a clear index of your weaker areas to focus on. This turns into a unique and highly customized study plan that is tailored just for you. So spend your shorter review periods, such as lunch breaks in the mornings or the evenings, on these more difficult areas when you're not rushed, when you're not doing a 4-hour just, study problem attack session and you're under the gun to just solve as many problems as you can. When you're in a more relaxed state, you're going to come back to it later on, maybe the next day, tomorrow, in a couple of days, whenever. You're going to go back to it when you're much more relaxed, more refreshed, you've had time to sleep and think. A lot more of the topics will sink in, and then when you're not rushed, when you have the time to go deep dive onto something, that's when you're going to go back to it. So I think hopefully this is all kind of starting to make sense and come together. So you want to spend your weekends and longer study sessions focused on nothing but, aggressively solving problems and moving on when you get stuck. So practice problems are key goals. Solve as many problems as accurately as possible during our study sessions. You know you're doing it right when you're mentally and physically fatigued after each of the longer problem-solving study sessions. So if you're not tired, got a hint for you, you're not working hard enough. So if you should feel like you left it all out on that scratch pad paper when you're done. Next, review your weaker areas and spend time more fully understanding the problems that stumped you when you're refreshed and not in attack mode. So I kind of covered that briefly already. More key goals: continue to document problems that stump you in the practice problem index. Continue to grow your study binder with formulas and notes anytime you need to look up information to solve a problem. And of course, use the Pomodoro Technique to ensure you make constant, steady progress, which is the key to get you through all of the material that you need to cover and get under your belt. Next, our last section on Stage 2 study. What topics to study and in what order? This is easily one of our most asked questions. So first and foremost, start with areas you're already familiar with. I want you to build confidence and momentum. Then move on to areas that have large volume of problems on the exam and concepts that are central to the majority of the topics. What does that mean? Well, if you look at your exam index from the NCEES, it'll show you the percentage of problems on the exam that come from each section. Example, system analysis at the time of this recording is at 12.5% of the exam, and same for rotating machines and electromagnetic devices. Those two sections have the most problems on the exam than any others. They're a great place to start. Next, key concepts that are central to the majority of topics. So let's talk about things like 3-phase versus single-phase formulas, phase versus line currents, phase versus line voltages, apparent power versus real power, the formulas for those, the power triangle, your trig identities to solve power triangles, real versus polar complex numbers and vectors, right? All that stuff. You can give me any topic on the exam, guaranteed I can give you a problem where that stuff comes up. So if you are not 100% fluent in that area, you're going to have a hard time no matter how familiar with the topic you are not, especially when it comes to 3-phase versus single phase and all that entails. So spend a lot of time, guys. These are the fundamentals. They carry across just about every single topic. You need to be strong in the fundamentals. A lot of times you're going to carry you through a difficult question that you might not think you can pass, but because you're rock solid in the fundamentals, you will breeze right past it. So first, when we're just getting ready to study, start with the areas you're familiar with, because there's so much to study, right? We want to build confidence and momentum to help our motivation. Next, move on to the areas that have the large volume of problems because we want to get the most questions right as possible. After that, move on to fundamentals. Make sure you understand fundamentals. What do we do after that? Well, we're going to pretty much systematically cover topics until we spend time in each one. But let's make sure we don't get fixated or trapped on one topic that might be more difficult. Think an inch deep, but a mile wide, right? Our goal is to cover the entire breadth of the exam, since it takes a solid understanding of almost all of the topics to get a passing score. But don't get too concerned if there's one or two topics that you can't solve the most difficult problem for, that you're not as strong as the others. It's okay to have one or two topics where you can pass, say 50% of the questions, but the more difficult ones you struggle with. That's okay. We really just want to make sure we have a really good handle on the majority of topics all the way from A to Z, from the beginning to the end. It's okay. Don't get too concerned. Don't let a weaker topic trap you and consume all of your study time that you can use to spend on other topics that you can handle with ease. So please be mindful of that as well. Last, expect some topics to take you longer than others. Some might be very short. A couple of topics on the exam are really just reference questions. It's more so testing your ability as an engineer to be resourceful and look up in references quickly than it is to crunching out long mathematical computations. So don't be surprised if some topics feel like they're taking you forever to work through, and other topics it's kind of like, oh, gee whiz, this took a day or two to cover. Did I prepare enough for that? So it's completely normal. Do not let it throw you off. Now, the last 2 to 4 weeks leading up to the exam, I want you to begin attempting full-length timed practice exams. That means no sessions shorter than 4 hours. They need to be timed the same pace of the exam. They need to be uninterrupted, and they need to have 0 breaks. This is going to get you adjusted to the actual pace of the exam, and it's going to get you used to how much time you can afford for each problem. So the actual exam, you're going to be faced with 2 4-hour sessions. Each session has 40 multiple choice questions each. This means a pace of 6 minutes per problem. If you're not used to this pace, you are going to be so overwhelmed, it's not funny. This is why it is so important. It's important to ignore this pace until you get close to the exam date. But once you get close, you need to start doing these attempt practice trial exam runs. So when you work the time practice exams leading up to the exam, be sure to use the test taking strategy that we're going to cover in depth on the next video. But it's going to make sure that you spend the correct amount of time on each problem. Most of the problems you're going to be able to get through much quicker than 6 minutes per problem, and that's going to give you time afterwards to check your work and spend on those difficult problems. And I guarantee you some of those problems are going to be real tough. They're going to take much longer than 6 minutes. So let's hear first from our unsuccessful student. Our unsuccessful student says, well, I sure thought I did a great job really taking time on every single problem while preparing for the exam to make sure I understood it thoroughly. Unfortunately, I was not prepared for how this approach was going to backfire on me during the exam. By the time I got to the 15-minute warning on the first 4-hour session, I was barely halfway through. I panicked. I raced through, practically guessing at the remaining questions. It was a disaster. The second 4-hour session, I did my best to learn from my mistake and go as fast as I could, but I know I made a lot of mistakes, even though I was doing my best. I think this is one of the biggest reasons I did not pass my first time, says the unsuccessful student. Now the successful student says, by the time the exam rolled around, I had already successfully completed 4 separate time practice exams and even reviewed the problems I got wrong afterwards. I felt the 4 hours per session was more than ample time and found myself done early, and I got to spend the rest of the remaining time going over my work. When I spoke to others after the exam, it seemed like I was the only one that finished with time remaining to check my work. When I got my results in the mail, it was no surprise to me that, hey, I passed. Kind of see where we're going with this? That's why it's so important to do those practice exams. So let's review. We're getting towards the end here. Our first section was a time-based study strategy. Eliminate distractions. Study time is precious. Respect and protect it at all costs. Set up your study schedule with longer study sessions on the weekends and shorter review periods during the week. Our second section was block out days on the calendar. Use your work computer calendar and your paper planner. Mark down in advance your study sessions so you can anticipate them. That's where we're going to kind of leverage those social cues. Next, use T- number of weeks starting on the exam date leading up to where you are now to increase your sense of urgency. The third section was practice problems. Put your time and focus learning how to quickly and accurately solve problems above all else. If you are going to take away anything from this Stage 2 study video, it's going to be that. Spend your precious time solving problems. Use the Pomodoro Technique to help get through the grind. Those two things alone, I guarantee you, will put you miles ahead of the competition. The other thing we talked about, keep a study binder with an index and every formula or concept you need to look up. Download the practice problem index after you view this video and print it out. Have a nice organized place for those problems that give you a tough time. And like I said, use the Pomodoro Technique to ensure constant, steady progress. Last, we spoke about which topics to study in what order. Start with familiar areas, build confidence and momentum. Move on to areas that have a high volume and central key fundamental topics. And then spend time on all topics, but don't get stuck or fixated on just one. Keep it moving. Last but not least, make sure you take a time to practice exam runs as you get closer to the exam. We want to make sure that you are in shape for that pace. We want to make sure you know exactly what to expect. And even though you're going to have a watch with you that we'll talk about in the next video, but we want to make sure that you're very comfortable with that pace and you know exactly pretty much how much to spend on each problem. So that's it. Stage 2, our study video is complete. I hope this kind of starts to tie in a lot of central ideas on the strategy that I'm trying to teach you guys that has been very successful for me and the people that I've taught it to. I want to make sure you're as prepared as possible to use all of your precious study time to prepare and really get a handle on those topics. So hope you enjoyed. Coming up next on deck is going to be our last segment on this series of how to pass. It's going to be execute, where we're going to be talking about the actual exam, what to expect once you get there, and most of all, the actual test taking strategy. All right, I don't want you just going in there blindly answering questions. So that's about it. But last thing, I want to leave you with one reminder: be the successful student. Do not be the unsuccessful student.